speaker today is Dr. Srilakshmi Pingali, who is MD Psychiatry from Lady Hardinge Medical College, New Delhi. She's an Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Gandhi Medical College and Hospital, Hyderabad. She's a consultant psychiatrist at Roshni Counseling Center and has been associated with the center since its inception in 2010. She has a special interest in child psychiatry and in spreading awareness and reducing stigma in psychiatry. She writes articles and does TV shows on various psychiatry-related disorders, explaining them in simple terms to be easily understood by the layperson. She's an avid animal lover and is involved in several rescue and animal welfare activities. Today, she is going to be talking to us about the psychological impact that war can have on the people that have endured it. Before we get started, I would like to inform you that our speaker today will be taking questions from you after her main talk. So please leave your questions in the chat box or raise a hand and we'll allow you to ask your question in person. Now, without further ado, Dr. Pingali, can you please start today's session, ma'am? Ma'am, you're on mute.
Yes, thank you, Mani, as usual, for the kind introduction. So we've been hearing a lot about war because of the war in Ukraine. We've been watching movies which have shown people suffering from internal displacement. All these have been running in our minds for a very long time. Now, as a psychiatrist, as a mental health professional, we see victims of trauma ranging maybe from childhood abuse to trauma as bad as a warlike situation. Now, with due respect to all those sufferers who are still continuing to suffer today, I can only tell you in technical and scientific terms about how people have suffered and what are the long-term consequences if they're not adequately addressed. These are not lived experiences. So with all due respect to the actual sufferers of the violence, I will want to start my presentation. So while I share my screen, yes, I think. Are you able to see?
Yes, we are, ma'am.
Yes. So in the next 15 to 20 minutes, maybe I'll just tell you about what happens in terms of psychological terms in a warlike situation. Now, let us just focus first on trauma. What, according to mental health people, is trauma? Trauma can start right from childhood, where it can be in the form of a neglect, where family members are not taking adequate care because of a dysfunctional family or an alcoholic father or divorced or separated or an orphan child. So when this happens, there is a possibility that this child grows up disturbed and unable to cope with the world in general. There can also be a lot of trauma due to violence, like seeing in war. It can be due to neglect. It can also be due to severe accidents that we sometimes meet ourselves, or when we see our children or somebody very close to us dying violently in an accident, or when we are victims of natural disasters. Now, I am originally from the state of Orissa, where we have natural disasters almost every 3 to 4 years, where houses are washed away, where trees are washed away, where people around you suffer from the effects of cyclones very often. So this is, and each part of India, I'm sure, has its own natural disaster that visits it once in a while. So all these, apart from having physical consequences, we do know that we get injured and we get serious injuries when it requires hospitalization. What is often neglected is a tremendous impact on the mental health. And in a warlike situation, abuse, violence, neglect, accidents, disasters can all happen together, and all that we know about trauma can occur in just in that period of war. Now, what happens is we're all armored. When these knights in the olden eras used to go for their wars, they used to wear these body armors from top to bottom to cover their body for the arrows. But in war or in severely traumatic situations, the defenses which our brain puts up to deal with trauma. See, if I'm going through a stressful situation, my mind tells me you relax, you go to sleep, or you socialize, or you minimize it and think, okay, tomorrow is another day and I will think about it. In a situation where your life is being threatened, the trauma is so overwhelming that the natural defenses you put up tend to crumble and you're left helpless in the face of overwhelming trauma. where your life is threatened, where your safety is threatened. You do not know whether you're going to see your loved ones once again or not. And you do not know why you're going through this in the first place. What did I do to deserve it? Why me? This kind of helplessness stays with you even when the situation improves, and therefore can have long-lasting effects. Now, the WHO, or the World Health Organization, estimates that 10% of the people have experienced serious mental health problems post armed conflicts, and they develop behavior which hinders their proper development. So what are the consequences? There are various consequences. If it happens, say, in a very small child, when trauma occurs in somebody, say in a small child, there's a hugely traumatic event. This child is in a war zone. Their entire development gets interrupted, which means a child, when they're supposed to learn to walk, to speak, to socialize, all in the safety net of parenting, gets completely disrupted. Trauma also increases the physical problems anyway then and there, and the long-term consequences of having physical injuries. But what we often forget is it has long-term psychological consequences. Who do we trust? Who is ours? Why did I suffer this? Am I wrong? Am I the victim? Or am I responsible for my situation? Are questions where victims often ask themselves. And can you imagine a child who's growing up with this feeling that he may have caused or that he actually deserved what was happening to him? Now, such a small child probably had lost his support of his parents or family members around. People to correct him and tell him that, look, this is not you, but it is the circumstances which are beyond our control. And when this happens, and there is nobody to support or change his cognitions, he grows up thinking, maybe I deserve what I got. This way, they're not only vulnerable to trauma then and there, they become vulnerable to trauma throughout their life because they don't think they deserve good things in life. So this is how trauma can play a major role in the development of the child. There's an increase of both the physical as well as future psychological issues, which I'm going to talk about in detail a little later. Trauma also increases the feeling of learned helplessness. What is learned helplessness? When you're in a situation and you're constantly bombarded with trauma all around, abuse all around, and you are the victim there, even when you're out of the situation, you feel that you're helpless. You have learned that you're helpless. Take the example of a huge elephant, which as a calf was being tied up and could never break its chains. Even when it is grown up into a full-grown elephant and still tied with tiny chains, it still feels it cannot break them because its chains are in the head and no longer around the feet. This is what happens to victims of trauma. When they're repeatedly traumatized, when there's repeated violence around them, there is this feeling that I am helpless, I cannot get out of the situation. You often see it in cases of domestic violence. If the wife is being subject to abuse continuously, repeatedly, every day, even when she has options of getting out, she feels she cannot because she is helpless and has no options to leave the situation. So these factors alone tell you how dangerous learned helplessness is. And of course, there are exaggerated emotional responses because you have suffered through so many emotions that every small event can trigger off a similar emotional response. And when one is subject to trauma, to violence in a warlike situation, where it is nothing to do with you or you did not start the situation. See, if you had a fight with somebody and you're physically beaten up each other, it's a different thing. There's some sense of responsibility that, okay, they bet me and I bet them back. But when you're caught in a war of not your making as a common citizen, you start to wonder what is happening. Then you start to wonder what is wrong with me. Then you start fearing people around you, thinking that everybody is like that. You start losing trust in them. And your entire perception of the world changes, especially when help does not reach you when you most needed it. So this feeling that I am worthless, the world is worthless, there's nobody for me in this world is a kind of feelings a child or an adolescent grows up with, or what even adults are our age also could do that. So not everybody who's exposed to trauma can develop these symptoms. There are some who would develop, some who would be very resilient and bounce back. We see so many examples of people who have come from various traumatic situations doing so well in life these days and are able to speak for the other victims. It is so appreciable, not only their ability to fight back their psychological trauma, but also to be strong enough to stand up for other people's rights. There are so many examples, I'll not take names, but it is a wonderful, heartening thing to see them speak out these days. But there are people who are more vulnerable than the others. For example, a person with low socioeconomic status. Low socioeconomic class brings with it a lot of disadvantages.
lack of proper medical care, already present dysfunction of family, already present poor nutrition, already present alcoholism maybe in the family. All this will add up to an increased vulnerability. We also know that the female gender is more vulnerable to depression, not only because of her place in society and that she is more prone to sexual violence or physical violence than the male, but also because the hormonal changes that come along with in every stage of life, starting right from the menarche or where the period start to the postmenopausal phase. So female, because of the societal, the gender roles and the biological roles a female goes through, the vulnerability of a female to trauma is far more. So in a conflict zone, apart from the young children who are developing, it is the women also who are as vulnerable. And extremes of age is vulnerable. Either a very young child who does not yet know what is going to happen, or an extremely elderly person who has already lost social support or is suffering from various physical illnesses or a cognitive decline and therefore suffers more. People having disabilities already, like they have a chronic heart condition or something to do with their physical disabilities, like a leg is not proper, or the blind people, or these are people who are already challenged because of disabilities, naturally will be more prone to trauma and the psychological consequences of that. People who don't have a structure. Now there are so many children who came back from the Ukraine, the medical students who reached home thankfully very safe. Can you imagine a child who is then forced to go out of the country, rush out, but doesn't, and comes out to have no proper support, even when they've come out of the war-torn zone? Nobody to share with, no proper health care, nobody to support. And then these kind of things, the trauma naturally doubles and trebles. So the lack of a proper structure worsens it. So children in foster care, children who are orphaned in war and have to be put in orphanages or foster cares, when they do not have a permanent caring parent figure, their trauma continues throughout lifetime and is not then and there. So when you're talking of trauma, when you're talking of war, please understand that it is not a cross-sectional thing. It is not here and now. War over, sab chalta hai, everybody is fine. It is not like that. The scars, both physical and mental, can last for a lifetime. The need to, why am I focusing on the vulnerability factors are, these are factors which we can correct. If we are sheltering a child in our homes, if we are fostering or we're supporting, we should keep it in mind that this is a long-term support. Be sure before you commit that this is a long-term support and they need a stable parent or a father or mother figure in their lives who would then be the emotional support or the emotional network for them. Also, the degree of trauma matters. See, if you're vulnerable, any small thing also can traumatize you and you can go into psychological issues like anxiety and depression. But most people or almost everybody suffers when the degree of trauma increases. When the murder is happening around you, when you see people and you not know whether they're going to come back home or not, and you don't have the luxury of even doing the last rites of those the people that you have lost, has increased trauma. Now, even COVID in the last 2 years has caused a lot of psychological disturbance because in the first wave, we were not given the rights to bury our dead or to cremate our dead, which has never provided closure to people who have suffered. Now, at least we know they're gone. Imagine those people who are the victims, who are in war zones, and they lose their parents or their relatives or friends and never see them again, not knowing whether they are dead or alive, not having the closure that they need. It is an open, festering wound in the mind that lasts for a lifetime. And the worst, possibly, is to live among your perpetrators, knowing fully well that they are the ones who caused you pain and they're going unpunished. That itself is re-traumatizing you over and over again. There are some protective factors, surely. Not everybody, like I said, goes through the same amount of trauma, same amount of pain as a person. Not everybody is same. Like you will have somebody, like WHO said, only 10% will go through severe mental illnesses, which means 90% is coping in one form or the other. So what are these factors which keep them protected? Even you and me, when faced with stress, what are the factors that keep us protected and prevent us from going through into a psychological issue? It is possibly what we call as resilience. Resilience, the ability to adapt and cope with situations. The ability to solve or cope situations in a problem-solving method rather than emotionally, where you list out and say, okay, I have this problem, this problem, this problem. Which is my priority? Which should I address first? Rather than getting emotional, worrying, and crying about it. if you have the good fortune to escape from the situation with your parents and your family intact, who can provide you with a nurturing environment, you have access to adequate housing, adequate sanitation, and healthy meals. That itself is a huge protective factor. And finally, when you're able to escape to safety and with a sigh of relief that I am saved now and there's no more any risk to my life, that itself is a huge protective factor. And of course, people who are religious and who, they are strong with a strong belief system in God, resorting to religious practices, the support from the community, all make a lot of difference and help to overcome trauma. Let's just quickly look at the various age groups and how they go through it. I'll cover children, adolescents, and elderly, and then I will tell you briefly about post-traumatic stress disorder, and then I will take your questions. So in children, what happens is whenever there is trauma, now if there are people other than those who want to hear about war, I will want you to understand trauma can also be because of parental neglect. It can be because of early death of a parent. It can be because the parents are separated or there is continuous dysfunction in the family. Or the child is orphaned and is in an orphanage. All these are traumas. Okay. So if you don't want to think in the extent of war, these are also traumas which need to be addressed. So parents provide the first safety net in our lives. When we lose that, we become more vulnerable to trauma. And if this parent is snatched away violently as it happens in war, it becomes even worse. When that happens, there is a lot of delay in development. Like a child who was developing properly till then, he was 5 years old and he had all the skills a 5-year-old needed to have. If this child grows up and is faced with the situation there, he may stop developing at the age of 5 and start developing slowly. So there's a delayed development. So he reaches the age of 10, his brain is still at the age of 5, which we call now as mental retardation. Or there is regressive development. Children, 5 years, 10 years old, who seem to be normal children, when faced with these extreme situations, can go on to regressive behaviors. What regressive behaviors? Bedwetting, thumb sucking. These are childhood behaviors. So they regress into the childhood. So either they are developing and the development gets arrested, or they regress to earlier forms of behavior. They develop various behavioral problems in the form of aggression, in the form of conduct disorder, in the form of hyperactivity, in the form of inability to set boundaries, using drugs. These are all the things that will start in the future. Now, the most surprising of all this is not only do your psychological issues increase, but constant trauma in childhood causes hormonal imbalances in the body, which then increases your tendency for obesity, which then will increase your tendency for hypertension later in life, increase in cholesterol later in life. And you know that these three are very dangerous combinations for the heart. So these patients, that is people exposed to trauma early in life, are more prone to cardiometabolic diseases later in life. So like I said, trauma is not cross-sectional, trauma is longitudinal. Even if the incident stops then, the consequences are long-term. Worsening all this in a child is the environment, which does not provide you with proper medical care because possibly the hospital has been destroyed in the war. There's no proper drinking water. There is no safety. Even the buildings you live in are hazardous. They compound the trauma 100 times. So injury, illness is something that we can physically see. The physical illness, the head injuries that children go through, by the way, which are the most common kind of injuries in warlike situations. It is so sad to read these reviews of what kind of injuries children go through and what are the consequences of such injuries. Okay, even if they survive and don't show overt symptoms of psychological trauma, like they're not overtly anxious or overly depressed, they may show it in other ways. Like they may complain of chronic constipation, they may complain of bedwetting, they may complain of disturbed sleep and nightmares. And it is seen that they may also be exposed to secondary violence. For example, if the father has suffered from PTSD, like one study said that the US war veterans, the children of US war veterans suffered more violence as compared to others and more prone to use firearms, possibly because of the exposure that is happening around them. They also will overtly develop anxiety and fear. They may develop aggression. They may develop something called dissociation. Dissociation is nothing but symptoms like tremors of the hand when there is no neurological condition, fits-like situation where they will fall down and throw their arms and legs around, but they will not be having any neurological cause to diagnose it as a seizure disorder. They may have episodes of memory loss, especially about the traumatic event where they cannot even recollect what happened then. So these are various forms of dissociation they can present with. And children, very young children, very, very young children, like say less than 5 years old, can display attachment difficulties. They may either become very non-responsive to the caregiver, or they may become overly familiar with non-caregivers. Like they cannot distinguish between strangers and their own people, and they are okay to go with anybody. They're over familiar with the others. They can go off anywhere. Okay, this is called disinhibited attachment. Or it can be a completely the opposite, where they are not able to attach themselves to anybody. So you can imagine the long-term consequences, especially when they grow up and they have their own set of friends, or even to their spouses, where the attachment becomes very cold. Adolescence. Now, many of my patient profile is that of teenagers or adolescents. Trauma, and even apart from the war, sexual violence is something many of our children go through, which is very unnoticed in our country. Sexual violence, physical violence in childhood. In adolescence, this shakes their body image. They're not sure of who they are, or whether they have caused their problems, or whether they are responsible for it, or they deserved to be a victim. So this kind of altered thought process makes them very vulnerable to situations like self-harm, to eating disorders. Every time there is an emotional distress, they're unable to cope with it, and therefore they will binge eat, or they will use drugs to numb their pain. And because they feel that they are responsible, or that somehow they have created it, and they're not lovable or likable because they caused so much trauma to themselves. Seriously, children do think like that. Adolescents do think like that. So they become more vulnerable. They crave for love at any cost. It can be a promiscuous sexual relationship as well. The other person keeps exploiting them, but they're willing to give as long as they get love and affection in return. So this is the kind of consequences trauma can have in the long term. In the elderly, like I've already pointed out, elderly are a special population who are already very, very vulnerable to trauma. One, they get uprooted from their places where they've lived all their lives and would love to, pass away there. Could never to see their homeland is an extremely traumatizing thing. People go into depression. People go into anxiety. People have passed away longing for their homelands. Also, in this age, there is a declining health anyway. Eyesight declines, your hearing capacity declines, your stability declines, your cognitive capacities decline, your heart capacity declines. So when your body and mind are anyway on a state of decline, going through so much trauma, which shakes even a healthy adult, is far worse in the elderly. So these are the vulnerable population, which need special care. And in adults, we spoke about the two extremes, that is children and the elderly. In the adults, they'll suffer from various disorders, like the same as that of the children and the elderly: substance abuse, depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, aggression, suicides, PTSD, which I will cover, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, why am I emphasizing on post-traumatic stress disorder and the other disorders is, as a psychiatrist or mental health professional, it is a little easier for us because this population is more expressive as compared to children who will not be able to express what they're going through, or an elderly who does not have the cognitive capacity to express. So this adult population is the best studied of all the trauma victims, and therefore we have possibly a little more information about them. We all talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, acute stress reaction. What are these? Let's see. When trauma is very mild, like there is an ongoing strife in the house between husband and wife, or mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, or there's a medical issue which can be solved in the long run, but currently it is causing stress, we suffer from something called an adjustment disorder. It goes away when the stress goes away. So it does not have long-term consequences, and it is then and there. But when you're faced with a life-threatening trauma, life-threatening to yourself or to people around you, you're observing it. Even if your life is not threatened, you're observing people around you being threatened, and the trauma is severe enough to threaten people's life. The immediate reaction you get is called an acute stress reaction. And the reaction which you develop gradually after a period of 1 month is what is called as a post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder has been recognized since ages, especially even after World War I, where they've called it the shell shock syndrome. People have come back with these disorders home and have suffered from lifetime disabilities. Even us, when we suffer through such kind of traumas, many of us are vulnerable to it. Especially if you may not have been through a war zone, but supposing you've been through a terrible accident where somebody in the family passed away, or you nearly died, that also is enough to trigger off a PTSD in a vulnerable person. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. So how is it categorized? How is it diagnosed? It is an exposure to actual, that is, you have been actually threatened with death, or you have been threatened with death. You face death in close quarters. Somebody very close to you has died violently, or you have been threatened with it, with sexual violence, you've suffered with it, or you have threatened with it, or serious injury. And witnessing it happening to others also, or learning about it also, is equally traumatizing. And when you are in the field where you have to keep looking at these details over and over again, for example, a police officer, or in our people, it's a forensic expert who has to go and do this postmortems over and see these gory details time and again. Re-exposure in a vulnerable person worsens the condition. How does it come? It comes as a form of recollection of the traumatic event. So supposing you have recently come out of the war zone, you've seen your friend pass away or get seriously injured, or you have had a narrow escape. You may keep thinking about it time and again. You may have flashbacks as though it's happening to you right then and there, or it can come in the form of nightmares that does not allow you to sleep. So either mention of it in the television, or the feeling that you had then, or the severe anxiety you had then when you're in the situation, may be enough to trigger off the whole response all over again. So what would you want to do? You would not want to go through these episodes again. I had a taxi driver who had an accident, and the person he ran into actually died so that man, the taxi driver, is so afraid that even if he drives, he never goes back to that road where the accident caused the death of another person. He never watches television, afraid that he will watch something about accidents. So what to talk of victims of war, where it is so much manifold. In these people, there's the ability to feel positive emotions of happiness and joy is very less. There is a lot of emotional numbing, and the negative emotions are paramount. There's distorted beliefs of self in the world, which I've already told you. Am I responsible? Nobody in the world is to be trusted. I am a victim. Did I do it to myself? Why me? All these distorted cognitions keep coming over and over again. In order to overcome many of their emotions, they may resort to reckless behavior like substance abuse, reckless driving, or self-harm, and so on and so forth. So PTSD is a difficult to diagnose condition, but people who suffer from it suffer tremendously, and it is a lifetime condition unless addressed at the right time. This will impair with functioning. There'll be overwhelming fear or overwhelming negative emotions. There'll be an urge to die. There'll be urge to, self-harm. And as the life goes on, functionality and the ability, your own innate ability to, to function well, to excel in life, all that gets compromised. So this is a situation that absolutely needs to be managed. So what are the things that we as a society can do? See, in a warlike situation, I think government policies, proactive government involvement is very, very essential to first ensure safety of her citizens, to get them to safety, to make them feel that, okay, I am no longer being threatened by death. So this itself is a huge factor in supporting and relieving of trauma. Once these people have come back from the war-torn areas, the need to continuously support them with basic facilities, with psychological counseling, with support and treatment of mental health issues, as well as physical conditions, also becomes paramount. Relationships, counselors, friends, society at large should make an effort to make them feel comfortable, to make them feel loved and protected. So in our busy lives, this itself becomes a challenge. There are specific forms of therapy called trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy, where they psychoeducate, they help parents develop skills of parenting, they help how to rethink your entire trauma. You readdress yourself as no longer a victim, but no longer as perpetrator, but as a victim, because you understand that you were helpless in the situation. You didn't deserve these things to happen. You did not deserve whatever has happened to you. So you learn to rethink yourself. And then because you rethink and relearn about your trauma, you also break away these chains of learned helplessness. And you understand that, yes, I'm a wholesome, functioning human being. And if I reach out, there are people to help me, and I will also be able to reach the heights to which I'm destined for, if only I make the effort and throw away the shackles of trauma. So this is where the trauma or the therapist who's doing trauma aims to get the patient to. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing also is a form of reprocessing of the traumatic memories. In addition to it, of course, the psychiatrist intervention when the trauma manifests in the form of a mental illness, in the form of anxiety or depression or PTSD. This is where we come in, where medication becomes essential. So I will conclude by telling you that whether it be trauma of an accident, whether it be trauma of a sexual violence, whether it be trauma of physical abuse as a child, whether it be trauma of war, trauma needs to be addressed. Trauma is not here and now, trauma is a long-term thing. The consequences of the body are easily seen, the mind is often neglected, because of which there is tremendous price, not only paid by the person who suffered from trauma, but also the society at large, because this person tends to become dysfunctional in the long run. So let us all show empathy towards the victims of trauma and do our bit to help them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Srilakshmi ma'am. That was really insightful. And I think, like you very rightly said, PTSD is perhaps very difficult to diagnose. And even for the family members, even for the person suffering from post-traumatic stress. Now I will be handing it over to our founder and the visionary behind Wishwa.org, Mrs. Shrivani. Ma'am, over to you.
Namaste. Thank you, everybody. Good morning. I'd like to share a little bit about WishwaTalks. WishwaTalks is a space to expand the horizons of our minds. Every webinar, we call experts from different domains to discuss and examine opinions, issues, problems, and perspectives. Each webinar is an interactive session where we all walk away with more respect for each other and a deeper understanding about the topic at hand. I would like to thank Dr. Srilakshmi for being kind enough to come and talk at such short notice on a very critical topic at this moment, with the Ukraine war happening and the release of a recent movie which has caused a lot of debate and discussion. Each of us have opinions on what is right and what is wrong. But the people who have gone through that, the impact they go through, not just, it is the victims of the war, it is the war veterans, it is society at large, and the repercussions on society in the long run, and the environment and the society, and how it can make a difference even after 30 years if it is not healed, if the trauma is not addressed. We as a society have a responsibility to bring in the awareness of such situations, such trauma that is existing. By God's grace, a good part of India has not faced this in the recent times, but it is still happening in the world, and we need to talk about it. We need to address it. With that in mind, Wishwa has come out with this talk, and Dr. Srilakshmi Garu has been very kind enough to talk about. Thank you for allowing us to understand the post-traumatic disorders and for us to be more empathetic to such situations. Anybody who has any questions, please feel free to ask. From one Ms. Pandita, how to make a child aware of himself about child abuse and sexual harassment in kids, in which age we should tell them about this?
So there's no age young enough to tell your child about a good touch and a bad touch, because and you've read the news, and if you look at research papers, it tells us that very, very young children are the usual victims of trauma because they're not able to express or even understand what is happening to them. So even in nursery schools these days, they are, most schools have this drill of teaching them to differentiate between which parts of the body they cannot really, others cannot touch. And if they are touched, then they should be told. And I, as a mother also, I believe that every child should be equipped to understand that something wrong is happening to me. But before just not understanding is just not enough. They should have the courage to come and tell you. You should provide them with the channels of communication where they should be able to come and tell you, look, this has happened to me. Is this right or wrong? Without you, reacting excessively to it or completely denying it. Most of the abuse victims of trauma that I see in my practice are children who had expressed to their family members at one point or the other that some family member has abused them, and it is their mothers who have hushed it up or brushed it on the carpet saying, maybe you misunderstood. And that has only compounded their sense of victimization and has worsened their psychological trauma. So accepting that your child is right, nobody else but your child, no child can make up such things. So When your child tells you something, act on it immediately, is what I feel.
There's the next one, Miss Shivani Potetar. Would you please talk?
So I think I have been invited here to talk about my experience because I am a victim of terrorism in Kashmir. So like like do I have the permission to speak about it?
Yes, you may.
Okay, so I think ma'am, as she said that yes, the situations like a war and I think terrorism is like a similar situation like a war. Only I think it's not nothing less than that because I faced this situation. I think it affects all the age groups. I was very young. I was around, I think, 12 years old, 12 to 13 years old. I was in school while we faced this terrorism in Kashmir, and we were like, we were like traumatized, and we were like, we were made so scared, and then we had to leave the valley because there were so many threats, life threats, and that's how I remember when I was very at that time I was very young, but still I can relate to it, and I think as ma'am again explained that trauma is not something which is very small. It affects your life, the entire life. Like I'm 44 right now, so from the time I've seen Kashmir files, and I have been crying so much, and because I can relate, because my parents, like I can relate to them, and not only my parents, I think the entire community. It's not that only I suffered. I think the entire community suffered in terms of everything. It affects you psychologically, it affects you financially, it affects your relationships, and I think a lot of it, like your careers, and you are displaced. And I think my dad, he could not and the climatic conditions also, like in Kashmir, we were in a very cold place, and when we got shifted to Jammu, it was like so hot, and some of the community members could not survive that heat, and they lost their lives. And even my dad, like I think he was stressed because he was on the hit list, and since he was in the army and we had to leave that place, and he's come to cancer, which I think could be because of the stress, internal stress he had. And then a lot of it too, we lost like my child, like he cannot speak Kashmiri language so fluently, like I can speak, but my child cannot, because because he's lost that culture. I think 90% of his culture is lost because when I, like, right now I'm in Rajasthan, and when I see people celebrating the festivals, and I feel lost somehow. I feel that I've lost my culture, because entire Rajasthan has certain particular festivals wherein they celebrate Gangor, and they have the Shamata, and there are a lot of festivals. But we also do celebrate. It's not that there are a lot of volunteers who are trying to keep a culture alive, but then we are displaced. I mean, our community is displaced. I think a lot of us are like we all are scattered to the entire world. Like we globally we are scattered. We are not at one place like other group of people. And then I feel that it affects you in the long run. And I even lost my government job, because when my dad expired, I could not take up that job, because my mom was so scared to send me to Kashmir. And she thought of not opting to it, rather than I staying at home. So I would have been in a good position, and I would have been earning a lot more than what I'm earning right now. So I think it affects all areas of your life. And as ma'am explained, yes, I think as a community, we should, we should work for such kind of people, in terms of their mental health. It's very, very important. Because I think we did get some kind of help from the government, but then in terms of the kind of depression we were facing, our elderly people were facing, children were facing their own stress, and because I remember I had to go to a new school with new new ideology, and in Kashmir I was studying in a totally different environment, so it affected me in the long run. And that's what I believe that we should have some kind of help for such kind of people. And thank you so much, ma'am, who started this this organization. So it's really needed in this world where for such people. And mental health is very important because we come to it, and it's something which we cannot talk to everyone, and we need a coach, and we need help for this. So that's all in short. And if anybody wants to ask me anything, it's okay with me. Thank you so much.
I am Dr. Srinivasmurthy. Can I come in?
Yes, yes, please. Yes, thanks, Ms. Shivani, for sharing your experience in that period. It's very generous of you to come out and share such a traumatic thing of your life with all of us, and making us aware of what it is to be in your place. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can I come in?
Yes. Yes, yes, Mr. Murthy.
I am a retired professor of psychiatry and been working with traumatic people with trauma for the last 40 years, from Bhopal disaster onwards, and written many manuals. But it was a very good opportunity to revisit this area. Couple of things which I want to add to the presentation of Dr. Lakshmi is that there is a group of people, about 1/3, who develop post-traumatic growth. I think it's very, very important to realize that this can be an opportunity for growth as well as trauma. Not everyone comes out of it as a loser. Okay. The second important thing which I want to focus upon, which was not given adequate importance, is self-care. I think there is a lot of literature that's available from from Afghanistan, Somalia, so many places, Iraq. I was the Iraq mental health officer for about 4 years for WHO. What are they? One is minimum of 30 minutes of exercise every day, 8 hours of sleep, good healthy nutrition, yoga, meditation, and those of the people who have recurrent ideas coming, as Lakshmi pointed out, this is one of the most distressing things. You hear a little sound, you think the cannons have gone off, or the accident has occurred again. Or you in Bhopal, they would say anytime there was a little bit of smoke, they would think the gas has come, gas aa gaya, gas aa gaya. Or in Orissa, after the super cyclone, when we are talking, they say when they see clouds, immediately they thought that the rain is going to, floods are going to come. So in those situations, sharing of feelings, when you can't share, journaling, writing down. This is something which we can teach everyone, and we do it regularly with our work in Bangalore. Journaling, teaching people to write down their things. If they don't want others to see it, tear it and throw it away, is one of the easiest, simplest, and as effective as going to a specialist, psychotherapist. More than anything else, equally important is music, art, and for children, play. They are very, very effective, particularly with the disaster population. The last thing is finding a meaning. All of us know the work of Viktor Frankl, he who saw people who had a meaning and purpose, even in the concentration camp, recovered and came out winners rather than victims. So I think we need to go back. Lakshmi did point out about spirituality. There is a whole lot of resources that are there within our culture, which will help us to do that. For example, when I was working with cancer patients, one lady said, I find solace, even in terminal cancer, reading Sundarakanda. I said, why? She said, because I think of Sita in the Vanavas, and that gives me, like that. There are so many stories of Parikshit and others which can be used in therapy. So the point which I want to make is, it is not a gloom and doom situation. You can use it as an opportunity for growth. And there are a lot of things that can be done in terms of self-care. And I'm glad that we are discussing this and make people empowered rather than dependent on either drugs or professionals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Very honored that you could join this talk. Thank you so much.
We have our next question from Mr. Rajshekhar. Do subliminals and sound frequencies or chakra balancing help this? Which form of catharsis would work?
Like Dr. Srinivas Murthy just pointed out, it is individual. So if you find, if you have belief, if you have relief on following, and if your culture permits, and like Sundarakanda is something that we do Parayanan every day in our house. So that gives us a lot of solace. So that's a continuous thread which binds different generations together in my family itself. So, but then if you don't have any clue about it, you don't start trying now. You do something which helps you. And if so, though I'm not an expert in any of these to tell you whether it is which is a better or a worse thing, but all I believe is that if something gives you calmness, if it helps you let go of your sorrow and helps you find meaning, as sir said, that is the way you should. This is the place you should be. You use what works for you.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are.
Good morning. Good morning to everyone, and very nice presentation, Srilakshmi ma'am. Ma'am, I'm also from Jammu and Kashmir, and I'm basically a microbiologist. So I would just like to add on some points from the view of a scientist. So like war creates lots of troubles. It also affects the trauma of many people. Like it creates anxiety, hypersensitivity, and even the main common problem is overeating, which we can see nowadays. And because of this overeating, even in children in any age group, there is obesity, and even due to stress, there is weight increase in weight of children and the other age groups. And also there are many changes, like there is anger, there is alcohol abuse, and people start taking drugs to relieve their pain, because they have gone through war and many things. So because war creates many situations, like they lose their families, communities, and it affects indirectly their physical and mental health. And as you said, scars are always left on their minds forever. So like even in my family, my grandparents have seen through their eyes what happened in militancy when they're in Kashmir in 1988. So they saw everything. They saw burning their house, and there was a very traumatic effect in their lives, because most of the people of their age group got heart patients and got heart attacks also, and some got neurological problems also. They got neurosis in their body. There were many nervous disorders. So because trauma is caused when one is witnessing other people's getting killed in front of their eyes, and then there are flashbacks which comes to one mind indirectly, and it results in many diseases like insomnia, weeping, anxiety, stress, which is caused due to these situations which occurred during war. And even one has to migrate for sake of their safety and their family, because it is like they have faced, like I have faced, we came as refugees to Jammu, and we didn't had any place to live. Because my mom was in police, so we got police quarters to stay. But other people, they stayed under roofs, and some even didn't have roofs over their heads. And because of that, there were no money, because they traveled alone. They didn't took stuff along. So they faced many this thing. And even I think nowadays, wherever, like in Russia or any other countries where the war is happening, even these explosives which they use, the military people use in war zones, it produces tons of carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, like greenhouse gases, which affect all the health of people living in those war zones, and even to the military persons, because these greenhouse gases affect and their health, in like they cause respiratory issues. They got problems like asthma and other things. And even the explosives and the oil which comes out of these military vehicles is affecting soil health, and even the bird population and forest. So indirectly, it is hampering overall everything. It includes the child health, the adolescents, their health issues, even the soil gets contaminated, the bird and animal population also get affected, like many things. And when people migrate to the nearby places, even overcrowding occurs. And due to this, there are many formation of slum areas. And there is pressure on the that country also faces pressure due to, because when people migrate suddenly, there is pressure on schools and other health centers, because there are no hospitals available in the war zone. So there is lots of overcrowding, and this indirectly increases pollution, and there is very less natural resources available for those people which have faced such problems. So they face many problems in facing their in raising their children properly. So I think overall it hampers everything. And the main is even the farmers are in very much loss, because their fields get destroyed properly, like we are seeing in nowadays in TV, that what is happening in Russia and Ukraine. So farmers won't be having any resource. And farmers, you say, na, they are father, because they provide us food to eat. They are the main source. So there are no fields left, because their soil has been contaminated during these wars by military vehicles, because there are lots of this soil pollution, and greenhouse gases have been increased to a tremendous amount. So I just wanted to add on, because it affects our environment in a very huge way. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Miss Neha, thank you so much for coming over to WishwaTalks and sharing your experiences. It's
Thank you, ma'am. My pleasure, ma'am.
our conversation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. So I would like to, since we are closing out now, I'd like to also thank each of the participants for being here on such a sensitive topic. Thank you so much. And thank you to Vishwa team. In spite of whatever breakdowns that you have, you come out with an impeccable talk. Okay, I would like to thank Biological Events. One of our first fundraisers with Roshni Trust has been completely funded by them. A great gesture of generosity. We also have another. Fundraiser, a student with cerebral palsy. She wanted an electrical cycle, and it is fully funded online. Thanks so much to the social champions of Vishwa. The principal, Mr. Rama Reddy, had floated this fundraiser, and we're very happy to hear about this. We would also like to say there are further fundraisers. One is Balbika's Education Society for Disabled Children. Surveys show that nearly 2 of every 100 children in India suffer from some form of mental disability. Children with such disorders find it extremely difficult to communicate with others and function in society, and as a result need utmost support and care during their development journey. For 14 years, Balbika's Education Society has helped many such children and parents of these children who needed mental growth and encouragement. They're raising funds to pay salaries for 3 teachers in turn, which can help at least 45 to 50 students in a class to be taught by them. So we recommend that either you, or if you know any corporates or any organizations who can pick up paying the salary of one student, to please do it. We also have another fundraiser, Totapalli Zilla Parishad High School. Here, we all know that toilets are very crucial for the hygienic environment in any school. Totapalli Zilla Parishad High School is located in Kalvakutti Mandal of Nagar Karnool district. The total strength of the school amounts to 226 students. 128 are girls and 98 are boys, usually shy and due to absence of functional or usable toilets in their school. These girls are dropping out of schools. We request that if there is anybody who would like to adopt and build one toilet, please proceed. We also have Roshni, which is doing free psychiatric camps for the underprivileged. Statistics shows that every 4 minutes, someone is committing suicide due to large-scale urbanization and shift in the population moving from a family and a community-centric lifestyle to a nuclear, often lonely urban setting. Suicides around the world are on a rapid rise, along with several other psychological disorders and emotional maladies. In an effort to change this situation, Roshni Trust, a Hyderabad-based mental health NGO, has been rolling out an initiative to conduct free psychiatric camps to the underprivileged. Roshni Trust, founded in 1997 by a handful of caring volunteers. Roshni was started with a vision of a society in which fewer people die by suicide and more people are allowed to explore and express their feelings while acknowledging and respecting the feelings of others. Roshni's primary objective has been to provide emotional support to those going through a crisis, battling depression or suicidal thoughts, or dealing with any form of mental illness or issues. We request you to donate as much as you can because every contribution counts. Your small gesture can come a long way, or share it with people who can make a difference. We also have a network of Telangana people living with HIV/AIDS. We are aware that HIV is a healthcare issue that also has serious social ramifications. The children living with HIV have it even worse. There is a lack of general awareness about HIV that has forced these children into the worst form of child labor just to support themselves. What is worse is that a large number of these children are orphans. Statistics show that nearly all the children that have HIV/AIDS were born with it. Telangana state has 2,300 children living with HIV. In an effort to give these children the right nutrition and give them back their childhoods, the network of Telangana people living with HIV/AIDS has been providing nutritious food to 100 children every month. Each packet costs 1,600 rupees. So if there's anybody who would like to donate 1,600 rupees per packet every month recurringly, and if we can group in 100 people who are doing this at least for a year, we can ensure that these children have food for an entire month. We also have Rudabaya Trust, which runs an old home for the aged. They require around 3,500 per meal per day. If there's anybody who would like to recurringly give 3,500 for a year, one day of that month, we could ensure they have food. And if 30 of us can get together and donate 3,500 recurringly, that or home for the aged is going to be taken care of. Today, home for the aged is a norm. All of us with nuclear families, we cannot blame anybody. This is how it's going to be. We need to support them. With this, we also have one more thing which Vishwa has newly come up, which is called the material vertical. All of us, when my kids were born, we used my sister's children's clothes, and there were 5 or 6, 8 children who were sharing clothes. But today I have noticed it is gone out of fashion to use used clothes. And my daughter has children and she's bought suitcases and suitcases of stuff from the US, and the child wears on the clothes twice and she needs to give it away. And when you want to give it away, it's below somebody's dignity to take it. We would like to remove this stigma in the market, where now we should allow people to use used goods and let it be accepted. And there are an n number of items which are already available in Vishwa, where people can take it up. So all you have to do is go into the material vertical. There are enough number of items available here. Our request is we would like people to access this, take on as many products that you all want can be useful to you all, and ensure people around you can use them. Similarly, if anybody would like to declutter their homes, please feel free to put your items up. You need any help, we have our staff, reach out to wishwa.org and we will be there to help you to upload your items. With this, we close the event and we can continue with the question and answer session for those of you who would like to ask. There is one question from Mr. Rajshekhar. How can an adult heal inner child traumas herself?
Inner child healing is a therapeutic process which used by psychologists to help patients with various forms of psychological issues. This question is best answered by a therapist. So, but you're welcome to Roshni anytime to understand how it is done. But to my understanding, it is a more guided procedure than a self-directed procedure.
I just wanted to say, since time is limited, there are a large number of resources which people can use themselves to come out of the child trauma. I'm not saying that it's applicable to everyone. And there are a number of things, because at this moment, the number of people who require service is so big, everyone cannot go to the therapist. So there are a number of things of self-care for emotional health. And as I said, I have put on my contact things. I would be very happy to put the person in touch. And there is a fantastic book, Triumphing Over Trauma, written by an Australian social worker, which takes you through step by step these things. And there are a number of them in that way. I'll be happy to put the person in touch with it and help the person. Thank you.
Next question from Ms. Farida. How does one help an adult, 41 years old male, father of two, whose wife jumped out of the balcony of their home while he was sitting just 3 feet away from her? This was 4 months back. He's under tremendous stress and strain and talks about taking his life. Very difficult to convince him to seek professional help. No support from his parents.
Suicidal thoughts or acts or even expressing them is a psychiatric emergency which needs to be dealt immediately. Now, if there is a real threat to his life, the government or the law enforcement also can be taken into consideration, but I don't think we need to go so far. All that can be done. See, I've also worked with the Institute of Mental Health where there is an involuntary patient admission where the person is unwilling. So there are two options here with us. If this person can be convinced, since he's already reached out to a mental health professional, I understand that Farida ma'am has seen him. So it is with us to convince him that he should take professional help, even if he's not having family support, because this is an emergency. And in such emergencies, admission and treatment is very essential, especially when he's voicing suicidal thoughts. If that is not possible, then we may have to consider involuntary admission.
How to handle a relationship abuse by women to men?
Okay, so you should define what you mean by abuse first. Second is if there is a conflict in the marriage and one of the partners is abusive, they need mental health help to understand where they're coming from. Sometimes it so happens that the aggression one expresses is usually the consequence of a mental health issue they may be having themselves. And is that treatable is the first thing that we look into. So if that is treatable, we also look at other triggering factors in the environment which may be worsening the condition. So this needs a whole lot of approach in terms of both medication as well as therapy, but definitely solvable. I hope that answers your question, sir.
Yeah. So we have Mr. Akansha Tripathi. My research is on women entrepreneurs in GNK. Could you highlight the mental health issues in moving on and changing their life?
I think we've already highlighted mostly. See, I can't make specific comments about Jammu and Kashmir right now, because then they'll have to go back to research papers based on that. But mental health issues of trauma, of being displaced, of the trauma not being acknowledged for the last 3 decades has played on everybody's mind. Like, I think the film has been a kind of catharsis for many, where it's finally out in the open and people actually acknowledge that yes, something so bad has happened, and that itself, sort of, it validates that yes, I've been a victim all along. So unless you do that, and unless it is not just about this is an extreme form of trauma, but even in daily life, when you go through trauma, there has to be some person who acknowledges that yes, what I have gone through is trauma, I am a victim and I need help. So your process of healing starts when you understand that this is something that has gone wrong with me, but I am strong enough to overcome it. And Dr. Srinivasmurthy sir has already told you many self-help tips about how you can overcome it. And mental health issues can range right from adjustment disorders to post-traumatic disorder, with the entire gamut of mental illnesses in between, whether it be anxiety, whether it be depression, and so on and so forth. So you have to, there's no set There is no set thing that this people suffer only from this illness and not from the other illness. It is again individual vulnerability and their environmental circumstances that determine what is the illness they'll manifest eventually.
So thank you once again, Dr. Srilakshmi garu.
Thanks.